Imagine trying to get a girlfriend when there are 34 people in your entire world. 17 of them are children, 8 of them are older relatives. A few of them are men who smell like smoke, marrow, and poor impulse control. And the remaining 3 are either related to you, already with someone else, or have watched you fall into a river enough times to know exactly what kind of person you are. Welcome to prehistoric dating. No texting, no photos, no playlists, no you up, no restaurants, no jobs, no deodorant, no real privacy, no language for situationship, which honestly is probably for the best. And yet, at some point, humans stopped just mating like every other animal and started doing something much stranger. They started choosing, coming back to the same person, caring who that person was with when they weren't around, feeling jealous, attached, possessive, comforted, completely normal for us. Completely bizarre if you zoom out and remember that we are, biologically speaking, just very anxious apes wearing fabric. So when did prehistoric humans make their first girlfriend? The annoying answer is, we don't know. The interesting answer is, much earlier than you think, and not in the way you think. Because there was no first official girlfriend the way there was a first wheel or a first needle. No one carved Uga plus Nara forever into a cave wall and gave archaeologists the closure they desperately wanted. Evolution does not work like that. It doesn't ring a bell and announce congratulations, pair bonding has now been unlocked. It works gradually, messily, over absurd stretches of time. And the fossil record, deeply unhelpful as always, preserves bones. Not relationship status. Still, we do have clues. Very good ones. From anatomy, from primate behavior, from archaeology, from human babies, who are, from an evolutionary perspective, one of the main reasons any of this happened at all. So let's start there. Because if you want to understand the first girlfriend, you have to start with the first absolutely impossible child. A baby horse stands up in about an hour. A baby antelope is basically born late for work. A human baby, by contrast, arrives unable to walk, unable to feed itself, unable to regulate its own temperature well, unable to do anything except scream with astonishing commitment and place impossible demands on every adult within hearing distance. Human babies are not just helpless. They are aggressively helpless. And they stay that way for years. This is one of the strangest things about our species. Our brains got so big and our upright pelvis got so narrow that human infants began being born earlier in their developmental process than would be ideal. If they stayed in any longer, childbirth would become even more dangerous than it already was, which is saying something because prehistoric childbirth was already one of the most dangerous things a human body could do. So now you have a problem. A mother with a very dependent child, a child that takes forever to grow up, and an environment full of predators, injury, food stress, and regular opportunities to die in stupid ways. That setup strongly favours help. Not vague emotional support, actual practical help. Food, protection, carrying, watching, staying, and once staying becomes valuable. Something interesting happens. So does choosing. This is where the word girlfriend starts to become less ridiculous than it sounds. Not modern girlfriend. Not matching profile picture, favourite movie. Let's define the relationship girlfriend. But repeated chosen partner. Preferred partner. The person you keep coming back to. The person other people notice you keep coming back to. That is a very old idea. Possibly older than our species. Now let's be careful here, because this is where people usually oversimplify things into nonsense. Humans did not suddenly invent romance one Tuesday afternoon 200,000 years ago, and our ancestors were not all either perfectly monogamous soulmates or chaotic ape libertarians with no attachments at all. The real answer is more awkward. Humans appear to be a flexible pair bonding species, which is a very scientific way of saying we form attachments, often strong ones, often long ones, but we also complicate them immediately. Some animals don't really do long-term partnership. They mate and move on. Others absolutely do. Gibbons pair bond. Albatrosses pair bond. Prairie voles pair bond so hard they basically made neuroscientists uncomfortable by being too emotionally coherent. Humans sit in the middle. We are not as rigid as the albatross. We are not as chaotic as the chimp. We are somewhere in the murky, dramatic, often deeply inconvenient middle, where attachment is real, exclusivity is negotiable, and everyone has opinions. That pattern is ancient. How ancient? This is where the evidence starts getting genuinely interesting. One of the biggest clues comes from something that sounds small but isn't. Teeth, specifically. Canine teeth. In species where males compete violently for access to lots of females, think gorillas, males tend to have huge canine teeth. Not because evolution thought that looked cool, because those teeth are weapons. If your reproductive strategy is fight other males, win and monopolize females, giant canines are excellent. Humans don't have that. And neither, interestingly, did one of our early ancestors, Ardipithecus ramidus, nicknamed Ardi, discovered in Ethiopia and dated to about 4.4 million years ago. Ardi is a very big deal. Not because she tells us everything, she doesn't. Fossils never do. Fossils are basically biology's version of someone handing you 3 puzzle pieces and then leaving the room. But Ardi matters, because male Ardipithecus appear to show reduced canine dimorphism. In plain English, males didn't have massively enlarged fighting teeth compared with females. And that suggests something. Possibly less direct male-male combat. Possibly less harem-style reproductive competition. Possibly more stable social bonds. In 2009, the anthropologist C. Owen Lovejoy argued in a series of science papers that this reduction in canine weaponry, along with other anatomical clues, may point to a shift toward pair bonding and male provisioning. Basically, instead of spending all your energy fighting other males, you increase your reproductive success by bringing food to one female and her offspring and sticking around. Now, is this universally accepted? Of course not. This is paleoanthropology. Nobody agrees on anything for more than 11 minutes. But it is one of the strongest serious hypotheses we have for when something recognizably like stable partnering may have started emerging. And if Lovejoy is even partly right, then the roots of the first girlfriend are not 100,000 years old. They're over 4 million years old. Let that sink in. Your dating problems may be ancient, but they are not that ancient. Now maybe Ardi is too early. Maybe that model overstates the case. Fine, let's move forward. By the time we get to Homo erectus, around 8 million years ago, the case for longer-term social bonds gets stronger. Why? Because everything about Homo erectus says increased cooperation, bigger bodies, bigger brains, longer childhoods, more travel, more dependence on food sharing, potentially more division of labour. This is a species that spread astonishingly far, from Africa into parts of Eurasia, and you do not pull that off as a loose collection of completely uninvested individuals who only meet for reproductive admin and then wander off. That kind of life requires planning, coordination, and probably recurring partnerships, not necessarily lifelong, not necessarily modern, but more than random mating. More than that, human females are unusual among primates for another reason that matters a lot here. Concealed ovulation. Most mammals make fertility obvious. There are signals, clear ones, sometimes extremely clear ones. The biological message is basically now would be a fantastic time. Humans don't really do that. There is no giant neon sign flashing fertile, which means sex in humans becomes less tied to a narrow reproductive window and more available across the cycle. And once sex is no longer just a seasonal or heat-based event, it can start doing something else. Bonding, stabilizing relationships, keeping 2 individuals around each other for reasons that are not strictly immediate reproduction. This matters a lot, because if your species benefits from 2 adults investing in a child for years, then turning sex into something that helps maintain proximity and attachment is not just fun. It is adaptive. It is good design. Weird, emotional, complicated, but good design. And the human brain seems to have leaned all the way into it. Helen Fisher, the biological anthropologist at Rutgers, used brain imaging to study people in early-stage romantic love and found activation in the reward system, especially the ventral tegmental area, a region involved in motivation, craving, and intense focused attention. In simpler language, love hijacks your brain. Beautifully, catastrophically, And that circuitry is old. Very old. Older than civilization. Older than agriculture. Older than our species, probably in its basic form. So if you're asking when humans first got girlfriends in the emotional sense, the answer is not when poetry appeared. It's when our nervous systems became capable of repeatedly locking onto one person as special. And by the time Homo sapiens appears around 300,000 years ago, that machinery is almost certainly already running. Not just attraction, attachment, preference, the beginnings of us. Now, can archaeology prove that a specific prehistoric man had a specific prehistoric girlfriend? No. Archaeology can do many things. It can tell you where someone was buried, what they ate, what cut marks are on a bone, what pigments they used, where the stone in a tool came from. It cannot tell you this guy was down bad for one woman, and everyone in camp knew it. The dirt has limits. But what archaeology can show is that prehistoric humans cared intensely about individual people. By around 100,000 years ago, at sites like Kafse Cave in Israel, humans were burying their dead deliberately, sometimes with grave goods. Bodies weren't just disposed of, they were arranged, marked, remembered. Later sites make this even clearer. At Doln Vestonis in what is now the Czech Republic, around 26,000 years ago, 3 individuals were buried together in a striking, deliberate formation. We don't know exactly what the relationship was. Nobody sent explanatory notes ahead. But we do know this. The people burying them thought the bond between those specific individuals mattered enough to preserve symbolically in death. That is not random mating behaviour. That is social meaning. That is personal attachment treated as something real. And then there is ethnography, which is one of the best windows we have into how small-scale foraging societies actually handle relationships. Among the AK of Paraguay, studied by Kim Hill and A. Magdalena Hurtado, long-term pair bonds existed, but they were not always permanent. People partnered, separated, repartnered. Children were often supported by broader kin networks too. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, pair bonding exists, but divorce is also common. Same with many other hunter-gatherer groups. What this tells us is incredibly important. The prehistoric human girlfriend was probably not a Victorian wife. She was not necessarily forever. She was not guaranteed by law or property or paper. She was something older and, in some ways, more honest. A chosen partner in a world where staying had to keep being worth it. No mortgage. No marriage certificate. No joint tax return. Just repeated selection. Again and again. I choose you today. Do I choose you tomorrow? Do you choose me back? That is a much harder system, actually, and a much older one. Now here's the weird part. In some ways, prehistoric relationships may have been more emotionally transparent than ours, because you couldn't fake much. You lived in bands of 20 to 50 people. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone saw how you behaved when hungry, tired, angry, scared, injured, embarrassed, successful, ignored. There was no curated profile. No carefully managed persona. No I swear I'm different once you get to know me. They already knew you. Thoroughly, against your will probably. So how do you get a girlfriend in that world? Not with charm alone. Charm helps. Humans have always loved charm, obviously, but not with charm alone. You get one by being the kind of person someone can survive with. Someone who shares food. Someone who doesn't panic. Someone who helps with children. Someone who is not violent in stupid, group-destabilizing ways. Someone who is competent, generous, reliable, and yes, probably someone physically attractive too, because let's not become anthropological Puritans about this. Humans had eyes before they had agriculture, but looks opened the door. Behaviour kept you there. This is why the question, when did prehistoric humans make first girlfriend, has such a frustrating answer. Because there was no first girlfriend. There was no first date. No first anniversary dinner with a disappointing candle situation. There was, instead, a long evolutionary shift from mating to bonding, from opportunity to preference, from sex as event to relationship as structure. If you absolutely force me to give you a time window, the most honest answer is this. Something like the first prehistoric girlfriend probably began emerging somewhere between 4.4 million and 1.8 million years ago. as early hominins moved toward more stable pair bonds, male provisioning, and cooperative child-rearing. By the time Homo sapiens shows up, the system is already ancient. By the time people are burying each other with care, using ochre, wearing ornaments, crossing landscapes together, grieving each other, and almost certainly getting jealous over each other, the emotional architecture is fully in place. So no, there was probably never one first girlfriend. There was no prehistoric couple standing under the stars while one of them nervously invented commitment. What there was a species slowly realizing that survival got easier when one person mattered more than the others. When one person became your person, the one you looked for first when the group moved, the one whose return made your nervous system calm down, the one whose absence felt wrong in a way hunger and cold and danger did not fully explain. That is older than history, older than farming, older than cave paintings, maybe older than being human in the strictest sense. And the reason that should make you slightly uncomfortable is that it means your modern romantic life, all of it, the crushes, the jealousy, the attachment, the embarrassing hope, the catastrophic texting strategy, the impossible urge to be chosen by one specific person on a planet full of billions. None of that is modern. It's prehistoric. You are running software written for a small band on an African landscape, and then wondering why it behaves strangely on dating apps. Of course it does. It was not built for this. It was built for firelight, for shared food, for someone carrying your child while you carried the tools, for returning, again and again, to the same face in a world where almost everything else was trying to kill you. So when did prehistoric humans make their first girlfriend? Probably not all at once. Probably not cleanly. Probably not in a way the fossils will ever let us verify. But long before cities, long before writing, long before marriage became an institution and romance became an industry, our ancestors had already done the important part. They had learned to choose one person on purpose, and keep choosing them, at least for a while, which, if we're being honest, is still the whole game.